The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
Well, baseball season is over. I don't think it's going to make much of a difference for those of you listening to this podcast, but for me it does. You guys know I'm kind of an unabashed Dodgers fan, and, World Series is pretty sweet, but losing it 2 years in a row is rough. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today. Yes, that's right. It is a basketball podcast, and now I am fully, my attention undivided as it comes towards the association. I mean, that's entirely true. I actually think that this year we prepared so well for this season. I'd be really surprised if many of you listening to this podcast had bad drafts this year, because I think we did an excellent job of avoiding the bad decisions in the top 25, right? Like, how many of you guys have top 25 or top 75 guys you picked in the first 6 to 7 rounds, or even 8 if you have a smaller league, that you're like, this was terrible? I think the closest guy is I ended up with like one share of Miles Turner, who I drafted probably around 40, and who in 9Cat is currently number 59. So not too terrible. There are guys that the rankings are a little bit sort of off because of one particular category, like Evan Fournier is ranked number 150 because he's shooting 39%. But that'll equilibrate. He's also shooting 78% at the free throw line, which is nowhere near his career mark there either. At least over the last few seasons, obviously. You got to go to the full numbers. He was 83, 80, and 86 the last 3 years. Last 3 years, he's been 46, 44, and 46 from the field. So there are things that are going to level off, but you wouldn't look at Fournier so far and say he's been a bust, even though he probably wasn't drafted in the top 75. I think basically everybody could get him around 100. Who's another guy? Like Josh Richardson, you probably got him about 55, and by all accounts, his season is going okay. He's not doing all of the defensive stuff that we wanted, but those things are going to come around, guys. He's had to do extra on offense because everybody's been out. I think you're going to find that as people come back for the Heat, you're going to be much happier with Richardson scoring 14 or 15 points a game instead of 20, but also getting 3 to 4 assists over a steal and a block and not turning it over 3.5 times every night. The trade-offs, ladies and gentlemen, the trade-offs. You're getting more in some categories, you're getting less in others. He's also shooting 39%. So outside of a couple of guys who are a pretty obvious statistical regression towards the positive side, there were almost no misses in the top 75. Outside of that, there's still plenty of time for us to totally crap ourselves. But those you can overcome pretty easily. You know, like Avery Bradley, I took in the very last round. And I dropped him within the first 2 games of the season because it was clear he wasn't going to have a feature role for the Clippers. But we'll get into this stuff a little bit later on, down the line, I should say, this season. It's not the time to assess the draft picks. But what I will say is that I added another money league this year, and I also added another free league this year against my better judgment. And if you guys are drafting the way I did, which I presume a lot of you did because you're listening to this podcast, then you should be in okay shape right now. Because in my head-to-head leagues, things are going well. In my roto leagues, things are going well. And so if all of those things are going well, then you're all right. You also, of course, in Roto, you have to look at how many games played you have compared to everybody else. Like, for instance, I am in 4th place, 9.5 points behind the first place guy in my Roto League, but I've also played 17, 9, and 10 games fewer than the 3 teams in front of me in that one. And the guy right behind me has played the exact same number of games. We are the, 2 of the bottom 3 in games played, and yet we're in the top 5 of that one. Going on to the head-to-head league, my team is 15-7 in one of them. Another one that started late went 7-2 last week. My other Roto league, I'm in 2nd place. I mean, I assume we all have pretty similar teams, and so outside of a couple of injuries, you guys ought to be you guys ought to be doing okay. But again, not a time to celebrate yet. I'm merely saying that we are in an okay spot. I am Dan Besbris. You guys probably know that. At Dan Besbris on Twitter. It's Monday, which means it's time to rock into a new week of Fantasy NBA podcasting. It is a very exciting week for a couple of reasons. Number one, we still got games going. It's just fun. It's just fun to have games going. It's fun to have League Pass working. So I can actually watch the ones that are not on ESPN. And I don't need an ESPN. I get Laker games locally here on Spectrum something or another. So I don't need the national TV guys to show the team that I get here anyway. So I can finally watch some of these other teams that I really wanted to hone in on. And number two, the guest list for the next week and a half of this show is fantastic. We're going to get all these new guys on the show. I'm so excited about it. You're going to hear from someone you've already heard from today, and that's our buddy Eric Goldman of Canis Hoopus, just checking in to get kind of a Jimmy Butler update on what he thinks is going to go down and what the timeline might be. That'll be coming up a little bit later in today's show. We talked to Alex Grez of Raptors Rapture. It's a Raptors website, not unsurprisingly, talking about the quick start, Kawhi Leonard just meshing with everyone, his rest schedule, the Danny Green phenomenon, obviously something we've been pushing pretty hard for about the last 11 days. So, after he played his first game, we've been thoroughly enjoying the Danny Green show, and, hopefully the wheels stay on. He's been a top 30 in 9-cat so far this year. You guys heard that right. 3 3-pointers, a steal, 1.2 blocks, 11.5, and half a turnover. Top 30. He's ranked ahead of Eric Bledsoe. He's ranked ahead of Taurean Prince. He's ranked ahead of Paul George. He's ranked ahead of Marc Gasol right now. We've had one of the best pickups so far this year. And again, that'll be on tomorrow's podcast. We'll talk to Alex. We have the great Vince Miracle making a reunion tour here, appearance on the show. I think that'll be Wednesday's podcast, most likely. We're talking to the Miracle Man about the Sacramento Kings. We have a chat coming up with the guys from Valley of the Suns to figure out what's going on in Phoenix. We're going to talk to the guys from the Wiz of Oz to talk about what's going on in the implosion of Washington Wizards basketball. Joe Garcia, who covers the San Antonio Spurs. Of course, we got Brewski coming up. I am so excited to have all of these folks on the podcast. It's going to be a really fun next 6 or 7 shows. And then the beauty of having a 6 or 7 show run-up is that by the time we get to the end of that stretch, we'll have some more fun people to throw on the podcast. I'm so excited I get to talk to other people this year. Such a nice change of pace, lecturing myself for 45 minutes every day. However, there will still be some decent stretches where you get to hear from me, largely when we're doing the what's the recent storylines kind of thing. And for today's podcast, here's what you got coming up. We got a Reverse Chronological Lightning Round Monday. We got to blast through the weekend at supersonic speeds. Then we're going to talk to Eric Goldman. You already heard about that. Get an update out of Minnesota. And then get you prepped for a Monday card that's actually relatively dense. The NBA has moved a lot of games to Monday in the sort of elongated schedule. It's a 9-game slate tonight. Starting to, by the way, get a little bit of a feel for the gambling side. Mentioned on Twitter yesterday that I had a decent feeling about the Clippers with the Wizards falling apart. The Clippers actually being a lot better than people realize. My hope was that over the weekend I would have some time to assess how my season win total bets look right out of the chute. But I ran out of time. So hopefully at some point this week we'll get to do a little bit of a rehash on that. Maybe not even necessarily on the podcast. That might just be on Twitter. This is, of course, a Hoopball presentation at Hoopball Fantasy, at Hoopball Tweets. Again, I am at Dan Besbris. Please do give me a follow. And I'm going to do it early in the podcast today. Please, if you have a moment, since maybe some of you turned me off before the show is done, if you have a moment, please subscribe to Fantasy NBA Today on whatever service you choose. Those subscriptions go such a long way in helping build up the show, get us into that plateau where we can get to advertising dollars from national sponsors and allow us to do even more things here on the podcast. More guests, bigger guests, the whole thing, deeper dives on teams. It just allows us to do more. So subscriptions, ratings and reviews, whatever you can do to sort of help us push the train forward, wildly, mega, super appreciated every single time. So thank you for that. Let's get into the Reverse Chronological Lightning Round. For those uninitiated, we will take a Sunday, Saturday, Friday directional analysis of the weekend, basically analyzing each team's most recent basketball game to get a feel for where they sit going into the week. Over the rest of the week, we do not break down individual box scores. Instead, we look at storylines, big picture things, and individual players that we've been sort of tracking as intriguing pieces of the puzzle. Mondays are the only day where we explicitly fire our way through a whole bunch of box scores, at least 15, because you got to hit all 30 teams, most likely more than that. And kind of, it's a reset button of sorts. So, let's reset. Sunday, we're not necessarily going to go backwards from late to early, because that sort of doesn't matter. Teams don't play 2 games on the same day. So we will actually go backwards daily and then forwards on each individual day. That may have not made any sense, but I don't care. The Warriors and the Brooklyn Nets. So Golden State, a hugely, just the least interesting fantasy team out there right now. You've got the main 4 guys, and that's it. Boogie Cousins not expected back for a little bit longer. There might be a center that does some stuff, has turned out to be, as expected, more of a flash in the pan when the Warriors played teams that had traditional big men. My love of Steph Curry knows no bounds, and the fact that I never had any picks high enough to grab him makes me so sad this year. Meanwhile, over on the Brooklyn side, Karis LeVert had a better shooting game again, but no steals or blocks, which limited things a little bit. He's having a very good start to the year. I want to continue to stress that we don't dislike Karis LeVert, but he's not going to be that sort of top 30 guy that everybody seems to claim he is right now. He's number 54 as things currently stand because he's doing nothing on the defensive side of the ball. He has 3 turnovers per game, and his 51.5% shooting is just not going to be sustainable. Is he an 85% free throw shooter all of a sudden? That's probably not going to hold either, right? Like, this is a guy who is getting better, significantly better, but guys don't jump 8 percentage points in field goal percent and 14 in free throw at the same time. It just doesn't happen. So there is a regression due for a guy already sitting outside the top 50. This is why we're saying sell high. Everybody is geeked up by the fact that he's scoring 20 points a game and he's taking a boatload of shots, and he is better and he looks better to the eye test. But if you can get a top 50 guy for him, you should do it. I would say the same thing for D'Angelo Russell, but I don't think people believe in him the way they believe in LeVert. Russell, amazingly, is only 14 slots behind LeVert, but they're basically doing the same thing out there right now. Points, rebounds, assists, a ton of turnovers on mostly unsustainable percentages. D'Angelo Russell's free throw percent is up 11% year over year. His field goal percent is up 3 year over year. Can some of these things hold? Yeah, but all of it? Probably not. So if you can trade him for a top 50 guy, you should. I know I'm breaking with the hoopball grain generally, but I'm not holding on to Spencer Dinwiddie in 12-team leagues. I just don't think there's enough time on the floor, especially with Russell and LeVert going crazy high usage pretty much every time they touch the basketball. So those are the only 2 guys that are probably on rosters right now, and I think they should be sold at a good price. Utah beat Dallas on the road behind Rudy Gobert's 23-16 monster game. Jay Crowder hurt his ankle in this one while playing extra minutes because Derek Favors, hurt his knee. Crowder should be used if he's healthy enough to go and Favors is out. If not, he's not another guy who's not as good as his numbers look so far this year, where the shooting is a bit over his head. The defensive stats are not there. He's outside the top 100, guys. It doesn't seem like it because he looked better, but he's outside the top 100 too. The Dallas side to me is the more interesting side of this game. DeAndre Jordan made all 4 of his free throws again and almost had a triple-double. What? He's a wild sell high. I mean, you might be able to get a top 20 guy for him right now. Wesley Matthews is going chuck fest, which is killing you in field goal percent, but he should definitely be owned and used. I benched him in this game, assuming the Utah defense would give him a tough time, and it did. But he's getting the shots up, man. He's like second on the team in attempts almost every night. And he's scoring 20 points a game. You have to use that. So he's turned back the clock a little bit, and should be a fantastic source of three-pointers and points, and hopefully the steals will start to come for him shortly as well. Phoenix got blown out and then came back and made the final score more interesting than the actual game was. Jeremy Grant, believe it or not, had the largest minute total of any single player in this ballgame on either side. I know that Nerlens Noel is the story here, but he's also sort of not the story because Steven Adams is probably not going to miss much time. If you can milk a game out of Noel, do it. Right? Like if we find out Adams is going to miss one more game, find a way to get Noel into your lineup for that one ball game because he could put up a top 20 line, which is what he did. But if Adams is playing, you better get Noel out of your lineup. He only played 26 minutes even without Steven Adams. Insanely efficient. I mean, this is what we've been hoping for the last 4 years with Nerlens, but he's never been able to play himself into the sufficient minutes. But, he's backup center who can't really shoot. You can't play him alongside Steven Adams, who's a starting center who can't shoot. There's just no room for that in the modern NBA. So as well as he may have played, his minutes are never really going to max out as long as Adams is on the floor. Which is why I think Jeremy Grant is the story in this game, because the other power forward options are all there. Patrick Patterson played 29 minutes in this ball game, some of which were at center, by the way. So Jeremy Grant, yes, Steven Adams being out, shifted some of those minutes down his way where Patterson would normally be just playing more power forward. But Grant played 37 minutes. He had 14 and 4 with a steal, a three-pointer, and a bunch of missed free throws. And that caps his upside, because if he's getting to the foul line 8 times per game, he's going to kill you. He's not a good foul shooter. You don't want him there. What you want, he's a 64% career free throw shooter. What you want is insane defensive stats, and he could very well do it. He's averaging 30 minutes a game right now, and he's averaging 1.6 blocks and 0.8 steals. The reason he's not ranked inside the top 250 is because he's shooting 33% from the field and 58% from the free throw line. Both of those are well below his career marks. If he gets back towards his career marks and limits the number of free throw attempts he's taking, he could be sort of like your poor man's Montrezl Harrell. So I like him. I think he should probably be on benches right now, but I don't think you start him until you start to see a little bit of that positive regression coming your way. Meanwhile, over on the Phoenix side, Ilya Kobo had 18 and 8. Those numbers are going to fall off a cliff when Devin Booker comes back, although Isaiah Cannon is now out with an ankle sprain, so perhaps he will fill in at point guard. Problem is, when Booker's healthy and Ayton is playing, those guys are going to get the looks, and TJ Warren took 17 shots, and Akobo's not going to get 6 free throws and make 5 out of 9 shots, including 3 3-pointers every single night. Keep an eye on him, though. I'm not saying don't watch him, but that type of, there just isn't going to be that kind of meat on the bone on a nightly basis. Clippers blew out the Washington Wizards. Nothing to see here. Boban got garbage time and put up a 13 and 9 line. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander nearly triple-doubled in 28 minutes. It's going to be an up-and-down season for him. Lou Williams only needed to play 16 minutes in this game because it was a runaway. Avery Bradley only played 23 minutes. Beverly, 25. Those are the guys that were coming back in the fourth if this ball game was tighter. It just wasn't. So basically throw it out. We did get news today, however, that Dwight Howard is likely to play by the end of this week. So if things weren't already weird enough in Washington, let's weird them up one step further. Oh, man, it's going to be fun. Oof, that's an under we had that I feel pretty good about so far. That one I remember. I don't remember all my calls, but Wizards under 44.5. They don't even have Dwight in the lineup yet, and they're falling apart. Let's go back to Saturday and try to turn the pace up on this a little bit. There were a lot of storylines on that short Sunday card. Boston-Detroit was basically a blowout. Not a whole lot to see here, although it is worth pointing out we were watching all the fringe guys for the Pistons, Stanley Johnson, Reggie Jackson, Reggie Bullock, Ish Smith. They're all right on that cut line, and so for me, none of them really has the upside to warrant a long-term roster spot. If somebody else pops up, like a Jeremy Grant, for instance, I think you move that direction. New Orleans was without Anthony Davis in their game over the weekend, and it sounds like his elbow is going to keep him out for at least one more game. Elfrid Payton is likely out for at least one more game, although we'll get some confirmation on that. And so the Pelicans, and this is why, by the way, I picked the under for them this season. It wasn't because they're not good when they're healthy. It's that if Anthony Davis misses any time at all, they're going to lose. They're going to lose basically anybody they play when he's not on the floor. And they got thwomped by Utah in this thing. Getting to 46 wins, if you're not at maximum strength, is very difficult. Julius Randle's also playing through a plantar fasciitis thing. With all of these guys out, we haven't really seen anybody step up. Just more Nico Mirotic and more Drew Holiday. So if you got those guys, probably just enjoy it. Charlotte came up a buck shy in Philadelphia. Kemba Walker might be the MVP of the league so far this year. He's averaging over 30 points per game. He's going bananas. I actually liked this line from Marvin Williams. I know you guys probably don't. 7, 5, and 3 with 2 blocks, a 3-pointer, 2 for 2 at the free throw line, and 0 turnovers. That's actually a pretty good line. On a night where there were 10 games, I think, 9 or 10 games on Saturday, that was the 45th best line in fantasy. That's the beauty of the 9-cat, man. When you have a 0 turnover game and you contribute in threes and blocks and rebounds and even 3 assists, that makes you a pretty useful power forward. So no, I'm not bailing out on him yet. I know that Michael Kidd-Gilchrist steals some of his minutes, and I know Miles Bridges steals some of his minutes, but I am not out on Big Marv yet. He's shooting threes and blocking shots, and that's a weird combination that should not be cast to the waiver wire. If you want to bench him, I understand, because the shooting has been down so far this year. He's never going to be a super high percentage shooting guy, but he's at 37% from the field and 63% on low volume at the free throw line. Over his career, he's a 44%er from the field and 81 at the free throw line. So he doesn't really have to change much of anything, and he should be able to get back to last season's numbers, plus the rebounds that are now available because Dwight Howard is gone. So don't panic. I think it's going to be okay. Old man Marv stays on my good side. I don't like the other guys in Charlotte. And there's a lot of Malik Monk stuff. He's fallen off a cliff. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, I'm not picking up because he's not playing enough. I do like Jeremy Lamb. I like Nick Batum. He had a rough one in this particular game. And I'm not yet taking a chance on Miles Bridges. And by the way, I don't know if you guys saw my tweet over the weekend. Willie Hernan-Gomez is fully out of the rotation because he can't guard anything. So if you're waiting on that breakout, a long wait time coming. Nothing interesting on the Philadelphia side. Charlotte beat Atlanta on the road. Chicago beat Atlanta on the road with some defense. What? Atlanta shot 32%, so you can basically throw out that game, except for the fact that Dwayne Dedmon played 27 minutes at 13 and 13 with 5 blocks, and it seems like, at least until John Collins is back, he's a very safe center play with more upside than I expected, although that may be the season high in blocks, and he might not get to 3 the rest of the way for all we know. So, don't celebrate too much yet, but enjoy what was a very good ball game. Justin Holiday was one we advised you guys to pick up last week when Chris Dunn was ruled out long-term. He had a couple of rough shooting games and then came busting back in this one. Didn't shoot the ball great, but 4 3-pointers and 5 steals. I can tell you, he won me a category in my head-to-head week. I was having a weird low steals week, and then Holiday gave me 7 in his last 2 games, and that turned a 6 to 5 win. It's an 11 category league into 7 to 4. Those little things go a long way. Jabari Parker is going to put up big numbers while Bobby Portis is out. Lauri Markkanen and Bobby Portis both due back at around the same time, same as Chris Dunn. Ryan Arcidiacono outplayed Cameron Payne, as we all expected. That is a wasteland at point guard. You can try to roll the dice, but if you're not doing it in a DFS format, you're probably hurting yourself. Indiana finally got themselves a nice, competitive, full 4-quarter game Tyreek Evans was out for messing up team rules, and that allowed Darren Collison to resume his role from last year. All of the starters actually kind of got back to their normal spot in life. Collison put up a Collison. 15 points, 2 boards, 6 assists, 3 steals, a 3-pointer on 5 out of 8 shooting. Hyper efficient, 4 for 4 at the free throw line. Let's hope that gets him jump-started a little bit. Oladipo was better, but continued to miss his free throws in this weird Russell Westbrookian start to 2018. Miles Turner had 3 blocks, but didn't rebound the ball. Thad Young had 2 steals, but also didn't rebound the ball. Somehow Indiana won this game with 24 total rebounds. I don't know that I can remember the last time we saw a number that low, but they shot 65% from the field, so there certainly weren't any offensive boards to get. And it's a weird box score. On the Cavaliers side, it sounds like Kevin Love is going to miss a couple of weeks to get that foot in order. A lot of people are going to be panicking right now, and I would suggest you try not to. A panic is easily the worst thing you can do in this type of moment. You got to wait until he's healthy. If you want to try to move him at that point, you can, but I mean, it's not going to get a whole lot worse than his awful shooting to start the year and then missing a couple weeks. So I would say your best bet is just to lean into it. Larry Nance Jr. is going to put up great numbers as long as Love is out. Rodney Hood looks like he wants to take a few more shots, but I still don't trust him. I don't trust George Hill. I don't trust Sam Decker. I don't even trust Chetty Osman, whose shot selection has been atrocious. And then, of course, Ty Lue got fired, so we're going to have to wait and see how things shake out for the Cavs. We're going to be watching that team very closely. But, of course, we'll get to that when we talk about what we're doing going forward. Portland, Miami, Damian Lillard almost brought him back. Kelly Olynyk is logging all of the power forward minutes right now. Okay, not all of them. But over the weekend, I tweeted he was a pickup, and I will say it on the podcast now. He's an absolute pickup as long as he's the starting power forward. You got to get him in your lineup. I hope he is owned everywhere by the time this podcast is over. Everywhere. Justice Winslow came back, played 19 minutes, looked pretty good. Dion Waiters soon, Wayne Ellington soon, James Johnson, who knows? Things are still going to get a little bit more crusty and crowded and ugly in Miami, and then we'll know who really is playing minutes. But right now, Whiteside is in there, Richardson is in there, Dragic is in there, Magruder and Olynyk. And we'll see how that changes, if at all, over time. But I am stoked about getting Olynyk in about half of my leagues after he played a bunch of minutes in the first half of this ballgame. I missed him in one of the ones where I wanted to get him, but I got him in a bunch of other places, and I think that's going to work out really nicely. Phoenix got blown out by Memphis. We've already talked about the Suns. The Grizzlies, they'll slowly start to figure this thing out. Marc Gasol looked much better in this ballgame. His shot will start to come around. Jaren Jackson Jr. slowed down, and this is going to happen. He got himself into foul trouble, just could never really get it going. This is Gasol and Conley for the most part, if it's not Jaren Jackson, as long as Green is out, and you can kind of roll with that. Orlando got thumped by Milwaukee. I know everybody was watching Jonathan Isaac. I was too. Rough game. 0 for 6 from the field, but a steal and 3 blocks. That's called salvaging it, ladies and gentlemen. So we will take it quietly with a nod that it was a bump in the road, but 4 defensive stats is great. Otherwise, this is a blowout loss, and everybody pretty much sucked for Orlando. Giannis Antetokounmpo took a shot to the head, may have played through it for a little bit. Sounds like he's going to miss a little bit of time, which means bonus Chris Middleton, bonus Eric Bledsoe. Let's go nuts. A lot of hoop ballers have those guys. I have them in a bunch of places. This could be fun. They're going to get to play a lot of minutes and do a lot of stuff over the next couple of games. Lakers and Spurs, you know how I feel about the Lakers. Just a lot going on right now. Josh Hart, I think, still is a must-own after a slow ball game. Lance Stevenson has had a couple of good ones, but I hope you're not buying it. The real key, I think, from watching Laker games, which I do for our Lakers podcast, is Lonzo Ball is going to overtake Rajon Rondo. It's a matter of time. It's not a if, it's a when. So if you're a Rondo owner, understand that the numbers he put up in this game are more in line with what you should expect. About 10 points. He's probably going to get you a handful of assists. The Lakers want Lonzo to do more. He didn't have a good ball game, but the 2 games he played with Rondo out, he looked awesome, and he was, I believe, the biggest reason they beat the Denver Nuggets earlier last week. For the Spurs, DeMar DeRozan, Rudy Gay, usually LaMarcus Aldridge, although he had kind of a weird ball game. Bryn Forbes has been pretty consistent as a scorer, but to me, it's just those three guys that you can really trust. If you want Forbes, you're doing it just to plug him in and try to get you a couple of three-pointers. What else are we missing? Let's go all the way back to Friday and make sure we didn't miss any teams on the ledger. Friday will bring us to the Raptors. Didn't play over the weekend. Danny Green, 15-8 with 4 3-pointers, a steal, and a block. Oh, baby. Ride it. Ride it. Let's hope it lasts as long as humanly possible. The Knicks, that was another team we needed to talk about and didn't get a chance to. 100% new, no, 80% new, no, 60% new starting lineup because Ntilikina changed positions but stayed in the starting five. Tim Hardaway Jr. is the only guy that didn't shift in any capacity. He's your safe play. Enes Kanter is still a safe play. I don't care that he's coming off the bench. He's a get in there and go kind of guy. Trey Burke is a drop. Hazonia is a drop. Noah Vonleh is not a pickup. Mitchell Robinson is a watch guy just in case he puts up kind of crazy numbers from the center position, such a rare spot on the floor. Damian Dotson is probably not a pickup. Frank Ntilikina had a scoring game, which is weird for him. I think you do have to keep one eye on him on the weird off chance that his 24 usage rate in this game repeats itself. He has never shown to be a medium. He's never shown himself to even be like a low-medium usage guy. He's a very low one, but if he starts to turn that up a hair and do a little bit on the offensive side, he can go from being a guy that should never be played to a guy that needs to be picked up immediately. So we're going to watch these Knicks games awfully close to see who's playing. Sounds like Kevin Knox due back in about 2 weeks. Courtney Lee, the expectation is somewhere in that same range. Emmanuel Mudiay due back soon, and then, of course, Porzingis is out for a very long time. Houston Rockets is another team on the docket we didn't talk about yet. Sounds like James Harden is going to miss at least another game or two, which means plenty of Chris Paul. I think PJ Tucker is absolutely worth using while Harden is out for the steals and threes. You just hope he doesn't take too many of them. Carmelo Anthony, can he repeat that? Probably not. I think you're going to see more Chris Paul in Houston's next ball game. And finally, and I believe this is the last team we haven't talked about yet, the the Kings and Timberwolves, the two teams we haven't covered yet in our weekend reset. Timberwolves are a mess. You got to just keep running your guys out there and hope things are okay. Hope that Jimmy Butler gets moved. And the Kings, as you may recall on Thursday's show of last week, I did officially take the sign off the treehouse. I advised an ad of Nemanja Bjelica, and then he just went crazy on Friday night. You got to keep trotting him out there. De'Aaron Fox should be owned and used. Buddy Hield probably as well. Willie Cauley-Stein had a big ball game in this one, but some of that was picking on a very bad Wizards team. And I think now is the time to stash Bogdan Bogdanovic if he isn't added already. Looks like he's owned in about half of Yahoo leagues right now because he's due back in about a week, and it looks like the Kings want to play their young guys this year. We're seeing 30 minutes a game from these dudes. It's why we avoided them last year because there was no minute consistency, but we're starting to see it in competitive games. Fox, Bjelica are out on the floor. Bagley is not, so I don't know that he's a drop necessarily, but he's certainly not someone I'm holding on to for dear life if someone else interesting pops up. Willie Cauley-Stein seems to be out there in most of those spots, and then Buddy Hield is sort of the coin flip, although when he's on the floor, his shooting has been very good. Okay, well, we talked very briefly about the Timberwolves during that recap because things are such a mess. I think it's probably time to learn a little bit more about them. I have so many questions and so many concerns that I don't even know where to begin. The situation has become, I'm gonna go out on a limb here, and I'm gonna say somewhat tenuous in Minnesota. And we have the great Eric Goldman of Canis Hoopus back on the podcast to try to give us any kind of light, to shed some sort of light on what exactly is happening here, beyond just what appears to be the most insane conflict of interest I've ever come across. Eric, thank you so much for coming back on the show on short notice, no less. It's good to have you back.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here, Dan. And tenuous is a word for it.
Yeah, I was trying to be very political with my statement here. You can follow, by the way, Eric on Twitter at CanisHoopus, CanisHoopus. They cover all things Minnesota sports, basically, not just the Timberwolves. But that's what we're talking about right now, because things are weird. The Wolves got just destroyed by the Bucks on Friday night. Okay, so let me just start with the thing that's confusing me the most, and we'll work to everything else from that. The thing that's confusing me is, why is Jimmy Butler playing at all if they're trying to move him as hard as it seems like they are? Isn't the risk of him getting hurt way greater than the reward of maybe sneaking out 1 or 2 extra wins here in the early season? That's mind-boggling.
Well, I mean, yes and no. The situation is so crazy and it's hard to really parse what's happening. But on the Butler front, I think from Tom Thibodeau's perspective, he has no real intention of trading him anytime soon. And and there's some question as to who's actually in charge of that, who's talking to teams, who's ultimately making the decision. But from Tibbs' perspective, after Butler made his trade request just before training camp and then sat out almost all of training camp, and his goal was never get a great deal, I don't think. I think his goal was always sort of wait this out, try and, avoid making a trade, and get Butler back on the court. And he's succeeded in that up to now. I don't think anybody's best interest, but that's what he never wanted to trade Butler.
So how do they play this out then? I mean, you've got a guy that you're signing to a max extension in Karl Anthony Towns, who clearly doesn't want to play with Jimmy Butler and doesn't look like he even really wants to be on the court these days. How can this not end poorly?
Oh, it is ending. I mean, it's not ending. I mean, I don't. It is poor. It's a disaster. And look. I think he will get traded ultimately. When they started the season with him on the court, I mean, I thought after he made the trade request and in the ensuing sort of couple of weeks, I absolutely thought he would never start the season with the Wolves. Turns out I was wrong. I did not quite understand the absolute relentless nature of Tibbs' lack of desire to trade him. But once he started the season with the Wolves, I thought, what? Tibbs won. He got away with this somehow. He has somehow convinced Glenn Taylor that, even though Taylor, said he would keep trying to trade him, et cetera, that Tibbs somehow had convinced Taylor that, yes, this could work as long as it needed to. And once the season started, I thought inertia would just keep Butler there probably, at least until the trade deadline. Now I'm sort of reversing course again. And you can see I follow this team very closely and I have no idea what's going on. I mean, but now I think, Butler skipped shoot around yesterday. And, later the Wolves said, oh, he was sick. But he wasn't sick. He was mad that they didn't make a deal with the Rockets. The deal that was in the media over the last day or two of 4 first-round picks. That was, and I mean, this was his way of expressing that. Then he shows up. He plays terrible last night. The whole team plays terrible last night. Glenn Taylor was there as he almost always is in the front row at home. They got completely curb stomped. They looked utterly disinterested and disconnected. I do think Taylor will finally kind of push a trade through at some point in the relatively near future. That's my guess. I think Tibbs still doesn't want it. And I think ultimately the problem at this point is not so much Butler, who they just need to trade and will eventually, presumably. I mean, it's a problem. But really, they have this major ownership problem and front office and coach problem, and they can't seem to get it together. The fact is that, Tibbs has to go. I mean, I don't know what else to say about the situation. He has created this atmosphere that makes everybody miserable. He has essentially allowed his, the most important player in the franchise, who's Towns, to be labeled as soft publicly when he is really not soft, and he's just created this incredibly toxic work environment that nobody's happy about. And, Taylor needs to do something about it, the owner. But that's the question. Will he, and when will he? Because he doesn't seem to want to accept how bad things are or realize how bad things are and, take the necessary action. Butler, in a way, is a symptom of that larger problem.
Interesting. Okay, so what do we think might happen over the next 2 weeks? Do we think Jimmy Butler finally they just sit him down and try to move him at that point? Do we keep seeing these weird half games, then a full game, and then no game? How do we think it might play out?
I think he's going to keep playing until they have a deal in place. Because Tibbs wants him to play. Tibbs, loves Butler and isn't gonna sort of cave in to the idea that he's inevitably gone and just sit him down until the deal is done. I think, on the other hand, it's tough. I mean, like I described before, I've been back and forth on what I think is going to happen multiple times over the course of the last, month and a half. So I'm not sure that I have any confidence that I know what's going to happen, but I guess if I had to bet one side or the other, I would say my guess is Butler is not a Timberwolf 2 weeks from now.
And then, so how does
that get a deal done one way or another? But I think he'll play up until then, and I'm not, I wouldn't bet a lot on my prediction at this point, since I thought that weeks ago, and then he came, is still here. So who knows?
How does that then sort of trickle down to some of the other guys on the team? If he is indeed gone in 2 weeks, if Tibbs is somehow gone in the not too distant future, do we see this team move away from guys like Derrick Rose and Taj Gibson going forward? Are those guys that are getting playing time exclusively because of Thibodeau, or do they actually deserve the playing time they're getting?
Well, Gibson's been a terrific player for the Wolves since they, over the last year plus. He's done his job. He doesn't, I think he's a respected player, not only in the Wolves locker room, but around the league. I think he continues to be a part of the team as long as he's on the team. Now, who knows what happens if they do, in fact. I mean, it's so awkward at this time of year. I think ultimately, if Tibbs goes during the season, which I think really is something that I would advocate strongly for at this point, then, my guess is there's a bit of a holding pattern in terms of roster changes. I mean, Butler will go, but I think, they won't have a real president or GM in place. I think Scott Layden will sort of man the position, but probably won't have a lot of, sweeping power to make roster changes. So my guess is that whatever they get out of the Butler trade, plus the guys that are, on the team now, are pretty much what we're looking at until the front office gets reformed, which my guess is wouldn't happen until after the season. So, Gibson certainly deserves his playing time as the roster is currently constituted. Rose is somewhat of a different story. He's been okay, and I think people are sort of overreacting to his play. He hasn't really been good, but he's been a little better than I expected so far.
Serviceable. He's been serviceable.
Yeah, but there are younger guys who probably deserve the playing time, and depending on who becomes coach, again, if a change is made, you could see a shift in focus toward getting some of the younger guys more playing time, presumably at his expense, because however you feel about him, he's not part of the future, right? I mean, so we'll see. We'll see what happens with that.
What about Anthony Tolliver? He's a guy they gave some money to in the offseason. He seems like a really good fit for the modern NBA. He's played a little bit more the last couple of games, but is that because of Wiggins being out, or is that actually them trying to work him into the mix a little bit more?
I think it's mostly just been because a little bit because Wiggins was out, a little bit because a couple of different guys got in foul trouble over the last couple games. And of course, he played a little bit more last night because they were getting blown out. And so it was mostly reserves for a lot of the second half. Yeah, I mean, Tolliver's, look, they constructed this team, I think, they made the playoffs last year, obviously won 47 games. And to the extent that they made changes in the offseason, it was about, veterans, guys who could fill a role, maybe help push them toward, a little bit further. It does not, it's only 6 games into the season, so who knows what happens. But, especially if they trade Butler, it's not looking like they're making, they're making steps forward in terms of record or achievements on the court this year. At that point, a guy like Tolliver, how much is he helping you? I mean, I like him. I'm happy to have him on the team. And again, I don't know what sort of front office action is going to be possible going forward this year. He might be a guy that other teams call about at the trade deadline. Maybe you can get a little, second round pick for him, or something that from a team that wants that rental, or so I mean, you could see something like that, but he's certainly not doing any harm. I mean, he's a useful guy who can shoot it. He's only on a 1-year contract.
And the last question I've got for you before I let you go back to watching and seeing what madness may ensue over the coming hours is, what's to come of poor Gorgie Dieng? I mean, really, what's happening with this guy? I actually really liked him a couple of years ago, and now he can't buy a minute on the floor.
Yeah, it's really been a rough story for Dieng. I mean, he was a starter. He was doing well. I mean, it's a little awkward in the modern NBA. His role is not entirely clear. But once they signed Gibson, he goes to the bench. Tibbs doesn't use his bench. And this is after they signed him to this big extension during this cap spike summer, which at the time, I thought they got a good deal. In retrospect, I did not quite, like a lot of people, I think, I kind of misinterpreted where things were going. And obviously the market for bigs like him, just isn't the same. And so he's actually, so last year was a complete disaster for him. His playing time got cut massively, and he did not play well when he was on the floor. this year, he's still not getting a ton of time, but actually he's, I think, playing somewhat better, more like his old self. He's a guy who can help you. And probably this backup center role is really his destiny. But, backup centers in the NBA, they can't be making $15 million a year.
No, that's a bit much.
Deal. So, it's tough. I mean, they really would like to move him with Butler in a Butler deal. And I think that's proven to be a pretty big hang up in terms of finding a deal. And they might have to just give up that idea.
Sometimes you just gotta go get something done. Eric, thank you so much for the update on what's going on in Minnesota. It's fascinating at the very least, and I hope that things work out okay. It's pretty crazy. I guess if you had to put your a couple of shekels on where you think he might end up, where do you think Butler's going? Is it Miami? Is it Houston? Is it someplace we're not hearing about? You taking the field?
Yeah, no. I mean, I guess this might be wishful thinking, but I still guess I would lean toward a deal getting done with Miami. That might be, again, because that's what I want to happen, because they have the one guy I would really like to get back for him, who's Josh Richardson.
Yeah, he's good.
And, I think they almost had a deal done along those lines. But, it could be, I don't know. I mean, that would be my guess. But again, it's really no more than that.
Well, I'm going to put it down in my books here as maybe Miami. I kind of want Miami. That seems like the final mark here. Again, you can follow Eric's work on Twitter at Canis Hoopus. The website is canishoopus.com. He is Eric Goldman. He is the man. He came on a podcast on the weekend when he didn't even have to record this thing. Thank you so much, and look forward to talking to you soon.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me, Dan. We'll talk again.
Obviously, as soon as something goes down, I'll be bugging Eric to hop back on the show. He is, again, Eric Goldman at Canis Hoopus, CANISHOOPUS. I may have said 8 instead of H. It's HOOPUS. And I also wanted to mention here, before we let Eric go completely, that a reminder, we have a coupon code associated with Eric's appearance on the podcast. It's the same one we had from a month and a half ago. No reason to change it if it's not broken. That coupon code is Jimmy, Jimmy, $3 off anything at hoop-ball.com. Right now, of course, it is the in-season premium membership. That's the stuff you can get. It's $5 off, I think, with a discount that's just been sitting there. And then it's another $3 off if you use the coupon code. So it's $22 for 6 months. Maybe a week or two less than that now, I guess, since we're into the season. But it's 6 full months of activity. The premium membership, that's $367 a month. Pretty awesome deal. Again, that coupon code is Jimmy for $3 off. Alrighty then. Eric Goldman, thinking it's going down sooner than later. I heard someone point out on, I think it was actually on our Lakers podcast, that it might be the Lakers that create the tipping point for the Timberwolves. That was an interesting angle, I thought, because you bring this hype train into town, and if the Lakers and LeBron just steamroll the Wolves, that might just be too much, because Laker fans are going to be out in full force in that ballgame. The arena is just going to be going crazy for LeBron. There's going to be some animosity towards whatever is going on with the Timberwolves, and if they look bad, that might just be the moment where something has to go. Okay, what are we looking for tonight? Like I said, pretty big Monday card. I want to try to do this on the quicker side, though. You guys don't need an 80-minute podcast on your Monday morning or afternoon if you're anywhere but the West Coast. Atlanta is in Philadelphia. The 76ers favored by 11. Pacers, 4.5-point favorites over the Portland Trailblazers, who have come out and looked good early this year. That's a team that perhaps my under doesn't look as awesome, although they did just suffer a loss to the Heat. Damian Lillard, his shooting, I don't think, can keep up quite so well. Not a strong feel for how this ball game shakes out, actually. Miami, 8.5-point home favorites over the Sacramento Kings. This is going to be an interesting one because Sacramento is trying to turn games into an up-tempo madhouse, and Miami doesn't much appreciate that. So this will be kind of two styles butting heads a little bit. Brooklyn, New York, the battle for New York. The Knicks favored by 2 at home with their weird lineups. I would love to say I have a lean to Brooklyn, but I honestly just don't know what we're going to get out of the Knicks in this game because I don't know who's going to play for the Knicks in this game. Warriors, 11-point road favorites in Chicago. The Raptors by 2 in Milwaukee, with each team missing its lead star. Kawhi Leonard is sitting the front end of a Raptors back-to-back, and Giannis sitting out this game for a concussion for Milwaukee. I don't know. I would say injured star theory, but you can't do it for both sides. Lakers in Minnesota, just talked about that ball game. I do think the Lakers win this game, but it's very possible Jimmy Butler just goes crazy, and so I think the line being a tight ball game is fairly accurate. I think Lakers win by in that 4-5 range. To me, that's not enough value to make a play on it. Spurs, 7.5-point home favorites against the Dallas Mavericks, and the Nuggets hosting the Pelicans. They are a 9-point home favorite. Denver looking to bounce back after the loss late last week. Nuggets didn't play, by the way, for a number of days in a row. It's a team we didn't really get to talk about on our reset. Still looking to see if it's Monte Morris or Trey Lyles who's going to pick up the slack for Will Barton, if anyone. And, of course, Isaiah Thomas still hasn't even played yet, so there's a chance he gets healthy, and then they just opt to go very, very small. Again, not many bets being made so far for me early this year. I did offer up a couple of leans on Twitter, and I think that's probably what we'll do if anything surfaces on this card. From a fantasy standpoint, there's always something fun to watch. We're watching DeAndre Bembry and Dwayne Dedmon in Atlanta to see if they can keep it going against a better ball club. Portland, the Zach Collins experience, he sort of saved his last line by making a bunch of free throws. It otherwise could have been pretty bad. He's a very weird case scenario because he's only averaging 20 minutes a game, but he's inside the top 35 after hitting a three-pointer and blocking 2 shots. He's Marvin Williamsing, but he's doing it better than Marvin because he's shooting 70% instead of 39%. So, yeah, I mean, you just keep using him until it falls apart, and at 20 minutes a game, it will fall apart because he's not going to shoot 70% for the year, but as long as things are going, let him go. Indiana, I think you play your normal starters in this one. Hope it's a nice competitive game where everybody gets in there their normal amount. Miami, Kelly Olynyk sounds like he still has that power forward job for this ball game, so he's a guy you definitely want to trot out there. Likely Rodney Magruder as well, although we'll wait and see the status of a guy like a Wayne Ellington. Not a game that I'm paying super close attention to, but I will look at the box score at least at the very end. Brooklyn, New York. This is one that I am likely going to be watching for the Knicks side to see how the rotations are going. Does Frank Ntilikina look aggressive in the offense? What happens when he comes off the floor? What's the deal with Cantor, Mitchell Robinson? There's a lot of guys on New York I'm very interested in to see when they play, how much they play, and how hard they play. And things could get moved around a whole bunch as the season goes on, but if we can steal 2 weeks of somebody going big for the Knicks, we might as well be on top of that. Chicago, Golden State, not a whole lot I'm paying attention to. I think I'm fairly sold on Justin Holiday. The Danny Green experience for Toronto is basically what we're keeping track of in this one. DeLon Wright, if he comes back, which it sounds like he will, where do his minutes come from with Kawhi Leonard out? And then, of course, we'll watch again when Toronto plays again tomorrow. Lakers, Minnesota, not a whole lot of storylines in this one from a fantasy perspective. We're just sort of watching everybody. The meltdown in Minnesota. Are the Lakers continuing to make strides? Dallas, San Antonio, also not a really interesting fantasy deal. We were watching Wes Matthews, but I feel like I'm pretty sold on him. And then New Orleans, you got all these injured guys. Can anybody step up? It's going to be short term, but it's worth watching. And then with Denver, can Monty Morris do it again? Does Trey Lyles do anything else? That's really the key on this one. So weird day in that I think a lot of the fantasy stories from last week have come to a reasonable conclusion. And so for homework, I want you watching the Hawks and the Knicks which play basically at the same time. So I realize you can't really do both necessarily, but do your best to watch the Hawks and the Knicks to see who's touching the ball, who's playing, when are they playing, how many minutes are they playing, who are they playing with, how aggressive they are they doing anything on defense to keep their position on the floor. These are the things we watch. Probably not going to be any pickups in the middle of the ball game, but by the end of the night, we might have an idea of some shifting, some tectonic shifting we'll have to do here. So those are the two teams we're paying closest attention to tonight, and that'll take us into tomorrow when we will hear from Alex Gress of Raptors Rapture. Again, thank you today to our buddy Eric Goldman of Canis Hoopus. Remember that coupon code is Jimmy. You go to hoop-ball.com, click on the Premium tab, choose Go Premium, and the in-season membership is the one you're looking at. Use the coupon code, get an extra $3 off the price. I believe it is still just $367 a month for the rest of this NBA campaign. I am Dan Besbris. This was Fantasy NBA Today. The week begins. Have a wonderful Monday, everybody. We'll catch up with you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.